We really jumped into that fast. I didn't even know. And then it just happened. I was like, all right, it's happening. It's like the first time you have sex, it's happening.
And then you stop and pull up a blog post.
Start with what's up, fuckers.
What's up, fuckers? Well, I guess we're doing the new segment, an error correction segment. And we got a number of pieces of feedback. So we're just going to go through them and then jump into the main episode, which is a bit of that classic disagreement, that vintage disagreement,
Yeah, we got to get more of that going.
Yeah, uncork some of the genuine disagreement and just fill up our glass.
So what do we have to do? We got to do Ivermectin because it's still unclear. It was definitely unfair of us to say like it was. I don't know if we said it was unhealthy. Did we say it was unhealthy? Because it definitely doesn't seem unhealthy to take. It just doesn't seem effective unless you have parasitic worms as well.
I think I said something rather dismissive. I think I called it like an animal chemical, and I just felt guilty about that. So Scott Alexander wrote just a really great, it's the most thorough meta-analysis I've ever read. And what he noticed was that ivermectin was more effective in places around the world, like developing countries, where there's a higher chance of parasitism, so having like parasites in your intestines and stuff. And so ivermectin works indirectly by attacking the parasites, and then that frees up the body's immune system to then fight COVID. So everyone was wrong. Those who said that it fights COVID were kind of wrong, I guess, because it only works indirectly. But then those who said it was completely ineffective were also wrong because it has some efficacy in parts around the world where people have parasites. So that's the record being cleared.
We really jumped into that fast. I didn't even know. And then it just happened. I was like, all right, it's happening. It's like the first time you have sex, it's happening.
And then you stop and pull up a blog post.
We said something about Václav Smil was born in...
he was born in Czechoslovakia.
Right, that's right. Okay, so he was born in Czechoslovakia. We said that was part of the USSR, but then a listener said, hey, listen, that's a satellite country. It's not part of the USSR. It was just part of the Soviet bloc. So apologize to all our Czech listeners out there. Even though it's not Czechoslovakia anymore.
Yeah.
That's also a sore spot, maybe. So maybe I'll just shut up.
Yeah, I don't know anything about the Czechoslovakians. Then there's a third one too.
Oh, it's climate change models.
Oh, yeah.
So we had said there's no climate change models available. And that's not true for all models. Like I think the IPCC models are behind, or at least not accessible, but there are, I guess we should have known this because they're like just academics working on climate change stuff. So presumably at least some of that's going to be open source. But I think one of our listeners, Luke, I'm not sure if he wants to be named, so I won't say his last name, pointed us did he point us towards a source of actual data, or he just said some of it is
let me
open source?
Pull up his correction. And this is all happening in the Discord, so yet another pitch for people to join the Discord if you want to correct us live. It's a great place to do so. Yeah, basically he gave a list of some models and data that were publicly available. But this ties a little bit nicely to Scott Alexander's post because, he has this one quote where he says he wants a world where I did a study, but it can't show you the data is taken as seriously as I determined P equals NP, but it can't show you the proof. And just this idea of full data transparency, I think was what we were getting at with the climate change stuff. And although it's true that there are some climate models and data publicly available, and that's important to correct our record, I don't think that it's nearly as publicly available as it should be for the kinds of claims that are being made. And just that Scott Alexander was kind of pointing this out, kind of in the general, that we should just request, data should be publicly available with every study. And if it's not, we should think of that as equivalent to someone saying they've proven something, but it can't show you the proof. I think the last thing we have to correct was with regards to climate change 2, I think, and our conflation of economic growth, division of labor, and free trade.
Yeah, I think the fault is mostly mine, to be honest. Okay. I think I was just being a little fast and loose with what I was ascribing economic growth to. I think I was mostly saying, we want as much free trade as possible. But I think, is it Ryan? Do you know?
It's Paul.
Or we'll say someone who is pseudonymously referred to as Paul off the Discord. Pointed out, of course, that you actually need just the innovation and the ideas before free trade. You can't just have free trade with nothing else. And what you actually need for growth are like new ideas and the space for people to enact those ideas. And then once people have ideas, free trade is a fantastic way to disseminate them around the world and let other people take advantage of those, thereby cultivating more innovation, et cetera, et cetera. But for me to just say, like, I think I just seemed a little like free trade was the one and only factor that you need to create like a cultivating culture of economic growth, which is, not true.
The example he gives that was just helpful for me is you have a guy fishing on an island, and he fishes 10 fish every day to feed himself. And then one day he decides to store 9 of the fish away. So that's like an investment, and he's now given himself some time. And he uses his time to come up with a fishing rod and a fishing net. And so that would be that's the innovation part of it. And then on another island, you have some guy doing something similar with, say, lumber. Then they can start trading. And so then you can see you have the division of labor. So one guy's doing fish, the other guy's doing lumber. You have the free trade, which is the exchange of fish and lumber. And then you have the innovation piece, which is the invention of a fishing net and a axe, say. And it's these 3 in combination which produce economic growth.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what we said there, but whatever we said that was wrong, we scratch that from the record and we replace it with whatever is right.
Beautiful. Just easiest way to fix everything.
Yeah, exactly.
So just put in the correct thing in your head, listener.
Just ignore what was wrong.
So we're kind of doing like an old school intro to an episode we've already recorded, but I'm curious, listening back to the Cults app, what you thought of it.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think I should have defended EA a little bit more. You brought up some good points, I thought. I thought it was a good combo. I think basically everything we talked about can apply to any other group. Yeah. EA just has a particular place in history as at the moment, just because they're like gaining so much momentum, or at least it seems like that to me, right? Yeah. So they like started out as this tiny little nerdy group with some objective, and they've like really succeeded in their aims. And so now the culture is much bigger and they have much more sway and they have a lot of money. So it's like particularly important to scrutinize them as a movement. But basically everything we said, I think, could apply to any group, and does apply to many of the smaller groups, but you just don't see as much of any of the cult like dynamics, if they exist, show up publicly, because they're just too small for anything to happen. So I think EA is actually a pretty good example of a group that's doing pretty well.
Totally.
Like no group is going to be able to keep those dynamics down to zero. They're all going to have like some problematic aspects of the culture, right? But EA is uncommonly good at seeking criticism, I think, and of like trying to observe itself and trying to cultivate like pretty good norms of especially like epistemic norms of people being able to like question authority and like criticize whatever's going on, etc., as was kind of seen by us leveling a bunch of criticism at them and them like actually engaging with it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think listening back, I was a little bit too harsh, and just thinking more about people like Julia Galef and Scott Alexander and other thinkers who I respect coming out of the rationalist community. And I think I was a bit more on the harsh side than I would have preferred, but hopefully it makes for interesting listening.
What's new, you know?
Yeah, I know. God, I'm trying to dampen that part down a little bit. But yeah, maybe let's just play the episode. Like, so do you want to get into? I think we actually have a substantive disagreement on this one. Would you say that's true? On
the EA cult stuff?
Do you want to get into it?
Yeah, possibly. Give me your thoughts. Give me the download.
So, first we have to introduce ourselves, right? Because that's what we've never done. So I'm Vaden from University of British Columbia, and this is my friend Ben from Stanford Law. How do we do?
Yeah, that was great.
Okay. I have a renewed interest in the effective altruist subject, and I was trying to work through the question, and it's kind of intentionally provocatively framed, of whether or not EA is a cult.
We just lost half the listeners.
Yeah. So I don't think it is. So I don't know, maybe just what are your initial reactions before we start diving into it? Yeah.
I think it's, so I agree that it's got some cultish aspects. It's on the spectrum of cultiness.
It's on the cult spectrum.
And I think people would sort of recognize that only because it's a group of people dedicated to a specific sort of abstract cause. I was reflecting a bit about this, and I think a lot of groups are. So I think you were getting into some debates on the Discord And I'm assuming part of your renewed interest in this comes because of the language aspect of EA, and they seem to be using terms like differently than how perhaps other communities of people you're used to interacting with are using terms, and seem to have formed their own vocabulary for certain phenomenon.
The language is definitely one aspect, but that's not unique to EA or like all groups will do that, right? So
maybe just, can you give me some examples of things that set the alarm bells ringing?
Yeah. So what I'm interested in, or what happens when you make people unite around this idea that they're doing good in the world. So good being a central value.
Okay.
And what's interesting about good being a central value is that I think it's very easy to replace this idea of having true and false be a central value and replace that with good and bad. So if your prime motivator isn't, say, trying to figure out what's true and what's not true, but instead it's trying to do good in the world or prevent bad things from happening in the world, I think that is a sharp dividing line between certain kinds of communities. So I'm thinking like social justice activist communities. I'm also thinking, and this is an invidious comparison, but I don't actually mean it to be, but like radical Islamic groups who think that the best way to do good is to follow the principles of their favorite book. I think that that's where you start getting compromises, and where people start saying, well, okay, this might not be perfectly true, but it's for the greater good, right? And so I think that this idea of having good and bad be a uniting virtue is something which separates effective altruism from other groups. There's a lot of charity organizations which do amazing work. So I'm not saying that good and bad will always lead to bad things. I don't know, Medicine Sans Frontiers, for example, or the hospitals.
That was bold that you went with the French pronunciation there.
Yeah, I don't know how. Yeah. So maybe I'll just start highlighting some other aspects of EA which make me a little nervous. For example, the having particular charismatic leaders who spearhead the movement, compared to, say, having a wide distributed network of scientists. And then also this idea that there's a very strange belief, which believing it is almost a signaling component. So this AGI thing, what starts to move it down the spectrum of cultiness for me is when there's like weird beliefs which aren't easily communicable to people outside of the community. So within EA, it seems like a lot of the people I speak to who are deep in EA are operating with a lot of misconceptions about artificial intelligence, which just don't map on to how people who study this stuff closely, how they think about it. So there's it's completely disjoint. And that is another unique thing with the EA phenomenon that I haven't seen elsewhere. I
think your account of EA would have trouble dealing with the fact that they seem to have done a lot of pivots with respect to actions that they recommend, right? So if you were convinced that you knew the way to do good, so to compare it to a religious movement, for example, there you typically have the factor where you have some, in the case of religious movement, a scripture that tells you what to do, right? And you're convinced of the truth of this thing.
Like ethical philosophy, for example. No, but I mean that as a direct analogy between the kinds of material that EA uses and the kinds of material that religious groups use.
Well, yeah, but there's a level of abstraction for the EA movement that I don't think you're accounting for. So the abstraction says, as a group, we care about doing good. We don't know how to do that, though. And so this community has built itself around asking that question and has changed its answer a lot of times. And also is very good, I would say, at soliciting feedback from the outside and soliciting feedback from people who disagree.
Well, I guess maybe here's a question. Can I ask you something that we haven't actually talked about on the podcast before?
It's more than 6 inches, Vaden.
Let's even completely drop the word cult, because I think that might be too loaded of a word. Let's just talk about social movements. I think it's a bit more general, and I think it's a less pejorative. And my question to you is, can you just tell me your personal story of getting involved in EA? How you found them, what the meetups were like, and just because I imagine there's something universal in the particular here that your experience will be decently representative of many people's experience.
Yeah, I can't remember how I first got introduced introduced to them, but I think it was via Sam Harris's podcast.
Nice.
And starting to learn about GiveWell. And so for a few years, I kind of just knew about GiveWell and that they were trying to do the most amount of good possible with people's donations, which seemed like a great thing. And that they were loosely affiliated with this thing called, or rather that they were affiliated with this thing called Effective Altruism. And I kind of took EA to just be GiveWell. Like I kind of just thought those were the same thing. And then I went to Japan after my undergrad and spent a few months living there, found the 80,000 Hours podcast, started listening to it. That podcast introduced me, I guess, to more the stuff that was EA set minus GiveWell, right? So the stuff that was like going on that was different from the donation stuff. But I'm not sure how to lump it in with rationality, especially for this conversation, because you said earlier that one thing that makes EA distinct from other movements is something like a focus on good as opposed to truth and falsity. But clearly the rationality community is obsessively focused on truth and falsity, right? So
yeah, but subjective truth. I would say they're focused on belief and uncertainty, not truth and falsity.
I think if you ask them, I think you are pointing that out because of the tools they're using. But if you ask them, they think there is objective truth, and they would argue that they're trying to find objective truth. It's just they're instrumentally using subjective tools because, to do that. So they would argue, they would acknowledge that something like expected value calculus is subjective, but they're using that as an instrumental tool to get to somewhere like objective truth. It's not like they're okay with everyone having different conceptions of reality, right?
No, yeah, excellent point. It's not like they would say, no, we don't care about truth and falsity. You're absolutely right. So no, I just take your correction. That was a really good point. Yeah.
So I mean, but then we have the additional problem, like insofar as EA is mixed up with rationality community, like EA, I think I kind of reject the remark that they're only focused on good, because they are heavily influenced by the rationality community, right? And so they are focused on truth and falsity.
Of course, yeah. So excellent point. Just to clarify, it's not a one or the other thing, but I think that if you drill down into a person and you ask, like, what is the most important value you have, it's more about like focus,
like rock bottom values, sort of. Yeah, nice. Okay, so yeah, to continue, then I went to Oxford after Japan, got more involved there, and spent some time volunteering as a student leader in like the Oxford student group, and that was probably my period of like most heavy engagement, and then came to Stanford after Oxford and spent a few months with the Stanford group, but then COVID hit, and then we started talking. And so I was simultaneously becoming slightly less enamored with EA, and then COVID hit, and then you really attacked long-termism hard, which convinced me. And so via that confluence of factors, I've been like more and more distanced. Although I still volunteer at the moment with giving what we can, which is I guess an EA aligned organization. So where I'll just see, because I said at the beginning, they have some interesting dynamics that I'm not entirely comfortable with, and what those dynamics are for me are something to do with the student groups. So there is an element of proselytization that goes into the student groups. Now, to be fair, I'm not quite sure how to avoid this, because if your student group focused on a cause, then you're going to inevitably try and convince other people about that cause, right? And not in a like coercive, weird way. You're just that's what you're gonna talk about, and that's the focus of your group. So obviously, you're gonna attract people who think like that, and then
totally. Like, what the hell are we doing here? We're trying to convince people of like exactly. So it's totally normal, and
so I don't fault them for that, but there is a weird element where there's a focus on specific thinking tools.
Yes.
Like expected value calculus, for example, as one of them, as a way to reason about the world at the expense of other kinds of tools. Now, this might have changed and is probably different at different student groups. And it's still, so it's weird because the groups are very open to discussion, right? There's no like silencing of dissenting voices. Like everyone's happy to debate and everything, but they do have things like student fellowships and stuff. And these are a little weird. And so I don't know if they're weird for me in retrospect, because now I'm so sensitive to this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And they might not be weird. I mean, I know they're not weird to the majority of people. One, because tons of student groups have fellowships that try and spread their ideas. And two, because tons of people sign up for the EA fellowship. It's like a very popular thing. And so, but I totally agree with you. There's something slightly weird about the structure of the student groups, like proselytizing the good word of EA to a certain extent.
I could so easily imagine a universe where it's Deutschianism in place of EA.
Yeah. I mean, I think the Deutschian circles have their share of this weirdness in spades.
As you get closer and closer to like the core founders, I think you get what you're left with are people who believe it more and more and more. So it's just pure survivorship bias, right? Like, but like I could just so easily imagine a universe where people aren't freaking out about what happens when like the AGI is here, but when like we create the creative program. So like capital T, capital C, capital P, the creative program. You could talk about it so exactly the same. And then you could talk about what the universe is going to be like when you have the
von Neumann probes everywhere.
So this is by no means an EA only phenomenon. It's just a human being phenomenon. And that's what makes me so interested in it.
I mean, so this brings me to another point you raised, which I think I slightly disagree with, which is this element of leadership that you mentioned. So you said there's some charismatic figures that sort of lead EA. And admittedly, that is true to a certain extent. But I think the EA network, for lack of a better word, is wider and like more diverse intellectually than you're giving it credit for, compared to something like the Deutschian Circle, where you have a couple podcasters in Deutsch. And it's like literally you can count them on a hand, right? Whereas EA, it's got it has like McCaskill and stuff, which I think is a good, like McCaskill and Ord might be examples of the kind of EA you're the most worried about. But then there's other faces like Pinker, like Singer, and these people have very different conceptions of what EA is, but do still talk about it and do still support it. And there's EA aligned people in like economics departments doing development. Then there's EA aligned people obviously in the rationality community, like we talked about, working on AGI. So I think you've seen, or at least have contact with, a specific subset of EA, and that's mostly the AGI focused, let's work on the long-term future focused people. But it's because the other people have like taken on EA maybe as like part of an identity, but have just like used that in their existing careers or align that with their existing interests and continue to work in like nonprofits or continue to work in Africa and stuff. And so like, so the 80,000 Hours podcast, I think, is a good example of this. Like they do have lots of episodes on AGI taking over the world, but there's also tons of episodes on just like effective ways to get people to take the COVID vaccine. Like, how do we deal with COVID in developing countries? How do we alleviate poverty traps? There's and so there's lots going on there besides the AGI stuff. And I think you have a slightly myopic view of EA based on the experience. And ends up like who you sort of solicit a certain kind of feedback from a certain kind of person, right? Based on your critiques.
100%. No, that's so spot on. And also like on the founders point, like it's hard to blame the founders, and I don't think you really can, because they're putting out ideas that they are interested in, and people react to these ideas and respond to these ideas however they do. And my God, like we all make our little bubbles and echo chambers and stuff. And I guess that's one of the reasons why making criticism a core value along like its truth, falsity, and then even underneath that is like criticism as the means by which you can get truth, falsity, good, bad, everything out, is one way to maybe, let me say, loosen the grip of that ever so slightly.
So the criticism thing is interesting because I think we've talked about this before, that like humans, we kind of have to like live our life, at least in the moment, according to like certain values, or at least like values keep us sort of anchored to things over time. But determining those values is very hard because it's easy to slip. It's easy to let the value take over at the expense of like things you actually care about, right? Yeah. Or actually, at the expense of like the well-being of like your friends and family and stuff. And the criticism, like living your life in accordance with soliciting criticism, is an interesting life hack to try and avoid this. So recently I've been noticing that I have friends who are very involved in various social movements. And then I've seen people leave these social movements. And it's rare, I find, to have people leave quietly and sort of maintain a healthy, respectful distance from the social movement, or or maintain respect for those aspects of the movement that they think are valuable, while just like diminish it or dismissing others. Instead, there's often this like full-throated 180-degree pivot where they've gone from this social movement is the best thing ever to I hate every aspect of it, and anyone who believes in any of this is a monster, and I'm going to use every intellectual tool at my disposal to prove them wrong. Obviously, this isn't everyone, but I've noticed it enough where, and this isn't just EA anymore. This is like just everything. I've noticed this enough to think that this is not like an accident. That there's something in the human wiring that makes us disposed to this sort of behavior where it's like 100% or 0% of something.
Well, like, because you and I were talking about this on back channels a little bit. And so one example comes to mind immediately, which is Dave Rubin, right? Was with the Young Turks and then pivoted hard. And he kind of did it like before the public conversation on wokeness reached its fever pitch. So he was early, and then he just got devoured by his obsession there. I see it's very easy to do that with the IDW. So you have this move of political correctness, say, and then you have the backlash to that. And so that would be like the IDW. And now you have a backlash to that, and that would be people talking about how the IDW are like the worst thing ever. And there will be a backlash to that.
Anti.
But the problem is this like very simplistic thinking. Like Eric Weinstein is an entirely different person than Sam Harris, but people just want to say the whole IDW, they're all crazy. And so here's a question for you. Like, am I doing that with EA? Because I think it would be very easy for someone to say that I'm just doing that whole thing with EA. And to some extent, perhaps I am. But I guess I'm trying to analyze it as a social movement and figure out the dynamics that go into the creation and the maintenance and the mutation of social movements. I
think you're doing it a bit, but not to the same extent. So I think there is a bit of generalization of like everyone in EA is scared about AGI, but you are identifying that EA has latched on to like specific intellectual tools that they like to use, and that do to a certain extent signal your membership in the community. So I'm not sure how many. I mean, this is just a question I could be refuted on. Like, I'm not sure how many EAs would reject like expected values or something. Like if you tried to say there was something wrong with that. Also, then we run into like membership issues. Like I would consider myself as someone who has bought your critiques of that style of reasoning, but has also learned like a lot from EA and like the kind of work they've done. And so now I'm just very averse to like labeling myself with anything, but I don't think it would be crazy for someone to look at me and say like he is EA adjacent at least, or in EA, right? That wouldn't be a crazy thing to say. And so maybe I refute my own thesis there. I'm not sure.
Well, I think I kind of sidetracked you because you were talking about a observation you had of people flip-flopping. So either being like, I love Deutsch, and then all of a sudden going to the other side and giving him a 1-star review on Goodreads.
So what I was trying to think about is like, what sort of thinking tools, what sort of like intellectual mechanisms can you use to dig yourself out of this hole? Because I don't think I'm immune from this. And in fact, I feel it in myself, right? Like I feel myself gravitating towards specific groups based on like a recent book I've read or something. And then because of that book has said something about another group, then I feel maybe it said something negative about another group. And I feel like, oh, now I see people on Twitter associating with that group. Like they must be all insane. And so this is, I do find this is my initial reaction to a lot of things. And so the question is, okay, how do I try and overcome this?
I have so I was thinking a lot about that, and I have an actual maybe not answer, but an attempt at an answer for this. So
nice.
First, I think that nobody's immune to it. We're all not immune, and the idea that we are immune to it, I think, is part of the problem. So I posted an article into the Discord, which you didn't like, by an author whose name I'm
Sasha Chapin or Sasha
Yes.
Chapin?
Sasha Chapin. I thought the article was phenomenal. And the central thesis of it was just that don't think that you're immune to in-group biases, because the very act of thinking you're immune, that you've solved the problem, is the thing that's going to make you doubly predisposed to it. It's like, I'm going to form a tribe around the idea, a tribe of the tribeless. Like, I'm going to form a group of people who are dedicated to getting rid of their biases. That just creates this terrible trap. It's just a trap. But if you do the opposite, so this is what I was thinking about, like, and so also responding to the idea, like, what can you possibly do about the fact that there's going to be student groups on campus? You can do nothing about that, but you can recognize that you're going to be as prone to, let's just say, peer group effects as anyone else. And so, in fact, you can use that to your advantage. And so one example is, I wanted to learn a bit more about mathematics. And so on Twitter, I tried to create a new echo chamber for myself, following a bunch of people who I didn't know, who are all studying math, so that hopefully some of those peer group effects would rub off on me. And it's like, you choose the peer group that you want to be more like, because you know you're going to be more like them. But then you have to keep switching. You have to keep switching, because at no point can you ever stop doing this, because you'll just become absorbed into the mass of people in a movement. So it's like, if I wanted to learn about libertarianism, I would follow a lot of libertarians. I would get into the movement, but then I would just keep tracking that at a certain point, it's going to be hard to leave it. So rather than trying to run away from or figure out how can I get rid of this problem for myself, just use it as a force to improve yourself. So if you want to be fit, get fit, then figure out a peer group where everyone cares a lot about exercise, and get into it. And then you're going to become like them. But just know that whatever group you're in, you're going to start taking on these characteristics. And rather than trying to run away from it, just acknowledge that that's going to happen. And use it to your advantage.
This is like the group version of surround yourself with the 5 people you want to be most like, but you have to continually alternate those people so you don't become too much like them. So where I was going with the criticism thing, and like this concern.
Jesus Christ. We're so far away from that. I'm sorry. Thank you for bringing that back.
It's similar. It's that if you can like reward hack yourself into thinking criticism is just valuable for its own sake, and view it as not like, regardless of who's sort of winning the debate, that we're just like kind of getting closer to the truth, then you will naturally gravitate from groups where everyone agrees on everything to groups where you just disagree about things, and then you're pursuing the truth. Now, obviously, you have to mediate this with like constructive criticism and stuff, because there are, you might engage with some people where it's just like, it's not going anywhere, right? That criticism is not going to resolve itself. But if you can sort of just learn to value criticism for its own sake, and just view it as you like, you're pulling apart strands of the fabric of reality, and you're slowly figuring out what the hell's going on, then being confronted with like groups and people who just think much more differently than you is like it's a fun educational experience, and you can like get high off of it. And what the best part is that if you're surrounding people who think the exact same as you, it's fucking boring because you want to be engaged in criticism, right? It's sort of I was realizing this this meta focus on criticism is a good way to try and try and form your social dynamics such that it's like you're maximally learning and disagreeing and arguing and staying interesting all the time. And then you're focused on another thing this does, another nice byproduct is that because the people where you make the most progress in conversation with, regardless of whether you agree or disagree, typically are just like nice people, right? People that you want to spend time with, regardless of how differently you see things. And so this like one selects for people who don't all think the same as you, but also selects for people who like can nicely disagree. And those are like exactly the kind of people I want to spend time around, like that don't think the same as me and disagree nicely.
Fucking beautifully said. Oh God, that was gorgeous. Getting shivers because I totally agree with all of that. And it starts to encourage certain behavioral traits. So if you want to disagree with people, and still be friends, then you yourself better be pretty nice, and you better know how to switch into it and switch the hell out of it. Like, so one thing that I'm trying to do much more now, because I wasn't very good at this and still not, is just like when you're having a conversation with somebody and it's a debate, at the first sign that they indicate that they're not enjoying it anymore, you pull out, you stop immediately. So something like, yeah, we've been talking about this for a while. You say, great, this was fun. Can I get you a drink? Because you always have to be in control of being able to stop, right? Right. So
otherwise you're just there to prove something.
And I catch myself doing this like all the time, and it's just like even sometimes when you and I are arguing, it's like it's
submit.
It's just not a good character trait. But so you have to be able to laugh the whole way through, and it's especially like at parties and stuff too. Like something that I would do is if you get into a big conversation with somebody and at a certain point, you notice their eyes start like looking past your shoulder, or they are just no longer like into it. You go to the goddamn bathroom. You go to the bathroom as fast as you possibly can, and you let them out of that conversation, and you just let them go, because you like, if you want to play this game of criticism, it's great, but you have to be so unbelievably sensitive to other people's reactions to be able to pull the brakes at the first sign of like, this is no longer fun. Because like I think it's so easy to essentialize and almost like deify criticism by just overusing it.
Totally.
But it sucks. Like, let's just be very clear, to be criticized and to receive, like, especially when it's like biting criticism, fucking sucks. And so you have to figure out ways to deliver it well and receive, and in particular, receive it well.
Which is very hard to do. Also, we should, this isn't advice for every possible social interaction. There are times when you don't want to be laying on the criticism and going deep down some rabbit hole, right? This is like broad brushstrokes of choosing social groups and stuff.
Because also, like, having a laugh at a party is also a lot of fun, and just like getting drunk and shooting the shit. So absolutely don't go to parties just to criticize people and to be criticized. Like, there are many other things you could be doing with your time, just like, I don't know, talking to somebody about the sports or the weather or whatever.
Exactly. So, and there are like, I mean, we've talked a bit about this too, like trying to figure out when to engage in like critical debate is a whole fucking skill that's very hard to cultivate. Because it's easy to misread the situation and think someone's up for debate and they're like really not. And then you go somewhere where you shouldn't have gone. You open up a topic of conversation that obviously makes someone very uncomfortable. But now you're there and you like, have to deal with it. And that's, that's just part of life. I'm not sure if you can sort that out. If you can remove the kinks from that 100%, but yeah.
I have no good heuristics for that except no, I do have one heuristic. Yeah, I do. This is one that I use all the time, just something I do now, which is always be interested in what the other person is interested in. So if you want to learn, then the best way to do that is to get criticism, yes, but that's one aspect of it. But another aspect is just keep forcing open your interests, so that no matter what the other person is interested in, you're interested in it as like a meta interest. Like if you download the idea of being interested in things that you're not interested in, and you use that as a tool of self-improvement, where it's like someone talks about, I don't know, a tree frog in Peru. I know nothing about tree frogs in Peru, but if that's what they're super stoked on, like, I want to learn all about that. Like, I never know when I'm going to need to know more about tree frogs in Peru, but like, tell me about it. And then you start talking, and then if they, in the middle of their discussion about tree frogs in Peru, they also say, well, it's because the capitalist superstructure is destroying them. Then you're already engaged in an interesting conversation, and there's some disagreement, which is united around a shared focus, right? And I found those kinds of interactions to be more positive.
Nice.
Finding the delight in being interested in specifically the set of things that you're not interested in is, I think, another good meta skill that works well with the criticism thing.
Yeah. One lesson that took me way too long to learn with regards to that is just the value of like asking people questions. So I don't know if it was just like a hangover from education or something, but like, so if, you're at a party and someone starts talking about tree frogs in Peru, I think naturally I had this tendency to go, like, am I interested in this? I'm not sure, but I would just shut up and I would just like kind of listen and just be like, Ben, try and be interested. Whereas it actually becomes much more interesting if you just right off the bat are like, okay, I don't actually know what a tree frog is. Like, what's excellent going on there? Like, why do you care about tree frogs? Tell me, like, what the hell is a tree frog? And that one, then you can just like alleviate curiosity naturally, which is nice. But also, like, it just gets the conversation going. You know,
Dude, totally. Well, there's this the magician Darren Brown. I think it was Darren Brown. One of his magic tricks was that he played like 12 chess grandmasters in a circle and guaranteed to like beat 6 of them or something. I might be getting some of the details wrong. But what he did was he would just play Grandmaster 1 against Grandmaster 7 across the circle, right? So he would play the first Grandmaster and then keep playing all of them. And all he would do is remember the moves that this person made and then play that move against the other guy. So the diagonals were actually playing each other.
Oh, what?
He wasn't doing anything, right?
That's hilarious.
But you can use that as a conversational habit. So I want to learn all about tree frogs in Peru because the next time I meet somebody who tells me about tree frogs in Peru, I'm going to use all the things I've learned from this person and bring that to the conversation with the next person.
Like you're leveling up your knowledge so to deploy it later. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and in particular, like, I find this to be so valuable when it comes to pop culture. So pop culture is something which I used to be quite dismissive of. Like, oh, who cares about the Kardashians? But in fact, pop culture is hugely important because it's popular. So it's a thing which you can expect the most amount of people to know about. And it's a good way to interface and start conversations with people who you haven't met before. And so when I'm at like a bar and if you and I want to talk about Karl Popper all day, but the conversation at the table is talking about Paris Hilton, or I don't know why I'm using attractive celebrities, but choose your pop culture. Then I'm going to absolutely remember it. I'm going to be super engaged. I'm going to know all the details. I'm going to ask questions, and it's mainly so that the next time that conversation comes up, I'll have something to say. You know, and it's the move to the other side of the table. But it's not artificial either. It's a genuine interest precisely because it's what you can expect people you haven't met to know in advance, right? And so it serves a huge function, and let's not forget, like I just like watching The Bachelor because I like watching The Bachelor too. So it's not pure just intellectualizing; it's also just like fun, which is important to keep in mind that it's not like do everything because there's a reason. Like sometimes it's just fun to do shit, and so that's great too. And so let's not be crazy about it. But
to steer us back, I guess one question I had was, what's the difference in your mind between EA and a student group just focused on like a particular subject matter? So is it purely the expected value reasoning, or you can imagine like a group of anthropology students very excited about anthropology, trying to get everyone engaged in anthropology and thinking anthropology can answer a lot of very important questions for us.
Well, so I guess one thing is just the sheer size and scale and soon to be political influence of EA compared to other student movements.
So it's just the size.
Yeah, well, so for that reason, it's I think worth unique study because it's not just a student movement anymore. It's like commanding hundreds of millions of dollars, and not only that, but it's determining what people do with their lives and their jobs, and it has huge influence over people. And in that article, which most people in the Discord didn't like, I think he pointed out that. I think it's very easy to start becoming obsessive about certain things. I imagine there's some people somewhere who have made a pledge, and I want to talk about pledges because that's one thing that we do disagree on, I think, pretty strongly. Made a pledge to work at a job they may not necessarily like live to give. I don't know what the phrase is, but earn to give, yeah. And then burn themselves out making money to give away to an organization in a place that they hate. That's all possible. I think that there's just enough factors that this organization, which seems like it's purely dedicated to doing good, which itself scares me a little bit, because this is what unites religious movements, is that they broadcast themselves as an organization which is like, it's an army of salvation. It's a salvation army, right? Like these movements are built around this idea of a greater good. And it didn't surprise me in the least that when I dug into the precipice and discovered this idea of like the long reflection, that it existed, and that there was this like very well-defined utopia that we could get to if only we saved the fucking world, which is what is directly talked about. And So I imagine that there are students all around the world who join these EA groups because they want to do really good. Who doesn't want to do good? And they meet up with a bunch of cool people who are doing cool things and smart, from Oxford, from Stanford. They're just great people. And they start getting closer. And then there's just this like one weird belief. And the weird belief is that like AI super intelligence is going to take over the world. And then you look at these like just utterly bizarre screeds by Yudkowsky that are celebrated on the EA forum. And then you have a choice. At that instance, you have a choice. You can either exit, you can voice your dissent. You can say, this is pretty fucked up, guys. Or you can become loyal and you can say, oh, maybe it is true. I don't know. I'm new to this group. Everyone is enthusiastic about this idea, and maybe I'm just going to go along with it just a little bit. And
I'll let you go along with this point, but just that's not true in the case of
that's the
AI,
end of
right?
that's the end of the point. That's the end of the point. Let me just generalize the point, which is that I think every movement has this moment of having to swallow something you don't believe, and if you feel that, this like, I don't believe this, but I'm just going to go along with it. That is the juncture point. That's the exit voice loyalty point. So that's the only point I wanted to make. Yeah. And so what don't you think is true?
Well, okay. Yeah. So, I mean, it's hard to know. So, because I'm not like heavily involved in EA. And so I'm not sure. I mean, I was never, there was definitely a lot of people who were very agnostic about the AI thing. It's not like if you're in EA, you have to believe that AGI is going to take over. And if you don't, then you either have to like dissent very vocally, and there's broad disagreement about if that's a thing, what it's going to look like, etc. And I think this is again just you having experience with a very small subset
okay,
of
that's
people who
totally
call EA, right? But so here's a question. So we talked at the individual level about how to maintain sort of epistemologically open social circles such that you don't find yourself pulled too far in any one direction, or at least maintain enough dissenting voices to keep you intellectually honest, or hopefully as close to possible as is possible for humans. But how do you do this at the level of groups? So I know you're sort of just averse to like groups dedicated to causes in general, but it's just a fact of our world that sort of thing will emerge, right? There's going to be people who are drawn to causes towards different areas, and they're going to want to come together as groups and make a charge. So, how do you as a group try and keep yourself open to criticism, open to changing your mind, but at the same time maintain, because it's easy to say in the abstract, well, you should always be willing to change your mind.
Of course, yeah.
Which is all fine and dandy, but a lot of these groups have like explicit goals in mind.
Yeah.
Right. And that is attention to a certain extent. And so, yeah, no, I don't really have an answer there. I mean, I think EA has done a decent job of this for all the criticism you and I are leveling. But that, they're very open, I would say, about their reasoning processes, right? Like, and the forum has like a lot of different people saying a lot of different stuff. They release all their research. They're very explicit about their priorities on everything. They often, they're very good at like citing each other about where certain ideas are coming from and where the idea came from. And in their eyes, they're doing this, they have this like epistemic credence thing where they like assign levels of confidence to things. And I know you're not a fan of that, but that is a way that they're trying to at least say like, hey, we're willing to change our mind. Scott Alexander has that classic epistemic, I forget what he calls it, epistemic level of epistemic confidence or whatever he assigns to each post. And so that is a way of saying, we're trying to get to the truth here. We're willing to change our mind, etc. So, you disagree with some things about EA, but they have done this better than I would say most groups have.
Totally.
But yeah, I guess how would you have them do it better?
Yeah, excellent question. Let's phrase it this way. So, question number one, if you were to create a movement, how would you go about doing it that would attempt to avoid a lot of these pitfalls? Maybe that's one way to phrase it. And then the second question, or a related question, the EA specifically, what could they do differently? Would you accept that as yeah? So I think on the like, if you want to create a movement that doesn't succumb to this, I think one of the biggest and most important things to encourage is that people get ideas from outside of the community. So one of the things that defines a cult, so if you want to talk about like cults proper, it's like a single individual plus an accomplice who is the sole source of information, wisdom, truth, beauty, value. But if instead the person said, listen, I am not your source of wisdom. And in fact, if you want to be a part of this group, you have to be reading as many different people as you possibly can, as far away from these ideas as possible, so that there's constantly new ideas, new influences, new people. That I think is one of the key things, because there has to be like a constant influx of new ideas from outside. It's very much this outside source thing.
Nice.
So that's one aspect, and I think that like the easiest way to avoid this, if you want a movement of people, is to just encourage them to learn on their own. Damn it. Like you cannot teach them everything. So I taught guitar for 10 years, and only a handful of times did I have students who graduated. But it was a very beautiful moment when they graduated, because like for the last, I don't know, 2 or 3 months of our like teaching relationship, I was like running out of things to teach them. And they got to my level, and then they would start getting better than me. And this was like the time that you go see somebody else now, because I had a finite amount of skills, a finite amount of things to teach them. And if I had done my job successfully, they should outgrow me. So I think that is a key component to keeping a community healthy, which is that like the whole goal is to strengthen people so that they can go out into the world on their own and be learning and doing things that are related to the community, but not solely inside the community.
Nice.
So that would be my answer on the first point. But then on the second point, like what could EA specifically do differently? I think in this case, a lot of the bad ideas are coming right from the top. So specifically, William McCaskill, Nick Bostrom, Hillary Greaves, and Toby Ord, and Eliezer Yudkowsky are perhaps unintentionally putting out a lot of ideas that are causing huge amounts of confusion, in particular the probability stuff, which I know I go on and on about, but I think it's a huge problem. And the AGI stuff. So I think that there's some things in particular that EA could do that would course correct it. But again, it's not going to happen. No one's going to do it. No one's going to listen to us. But I think that like of the few people who are listening to us, like the most important advice I could say is just recognize that you're in a movement, in a community, and it has its pros and it has its cons, but just keep seeking out new communities. And like whatever community you're in, just be in 4 more so that you can compare and contrast. Just do that. And that will be very valuable, because then like as soon as you have this like moment of joining a new community where they're all talking about different things and you realize there's just like a new way to talk about stuff, it kind of shakes you from your complacency a little bit, I think. So there's one other dimension which we haven't talked about before, but I think that there is just an intrinsic attraction to weird ideas. And the weirder, the cooler. And it kind of makes it sound like sci-fi and fun. And so because weird ideas are fun to talk about, and you get that like freeze-on factor when you can say a weird idea to your friend, I think that EA skews heavily towards just being interested in weird ideas. And some of them can be cool and some can be not, but like, and that's maybe just a function of youth too. When I was younger, I liked weird ideas. But weird ideas are probably the ones that aren't true. And like, I remember somewhere Pinker said that like this idea was too weird to be true. It's just a heuristic that like, if something sounds cool or fun or interesting or like, oh, that's wild. Like the many worlds interpretation is an example, which is backed by some heavy hitters. So I'm not weighing in on that, but the attraction to the many worlds by EA makes perfect sense, because they like weird ideas are fun to think about, and you can't just think about malarial bed nets all day. But unfortunately, the stuff that makes like a change in the world, the stuff that actually will help people and bring people out of poverty and like actually save people's lives, are the boring ideas, the ones that are tried and tested and true, which is getting people food, getting people vaccines, just helping to fight poverty and just doing the hard work, And so it's just so much more fun to talk about weird ideas than it is to talk about the meat and potatoes, boring, bland stuff. But it's very important to recognize that the temptation to talk about weird things is like, that should be seen as like junk food ideas or something. Like they're fun, do it in some, like, of course, weird ideas are great, but don't overdose on junk food, please. So that would be another aspect of it.
I mean, those tried and tested and true ideas were someone's weird ideas at some point.
Mm-hmm. So, of course. Yep. Of course. Yep. So there's no one size fits all.
Yeah, I agree. I think EA does have that problem. Like a lot of younger, more analytically driven movements do. Like a lot of CS clubs and stuff have that too, where they have this sort of contrarian streak, right? Where like ideas that aren't mainstream are the most attractive.
So I don't know. Do you think we solved it? Think we got to the bottom of it?
I'm sure everyone listening to us is utterly convinced. I'm sure Yudkowsky is going to back off his AGI claims and change his stance on probability.
Well, why did we just do this earlier then?
Yeah, fuck, this should have been the first episode. I wonder if we lost all the EA people like 20 minutes in. Fuck these guys. These assholes. Well, I tried to stick up for you.
I mean, I love EA people. Like, I love you. You're an EA person. I love everyone who's in the Discord. The Discord's half EA people, which is great, which is why I love them all. And it's not the people, man. It's the ideas.
Speaking of that, come hang out on the Discord. We've had, since we opened it up from the last episode, we had like a bunch of people join. That's great. We're going to keep it open. So yeah, if you want to come hang out, come hang out. Prove Vaden wrong. Yeah. No better feeling than proving Vaden wrong.
Yeah, that's fun. You could say things into a microphone, and then some people will email you, and then join the Discord, and then fight with you, which is awesome. But yeah, email, tweet. I guess should we do like social media tags at the end of these things? I feel like we should. Yeah. Tweet us, like us, share us on Facebook. People still use that. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
And scene.